It was a moonless night, and the headlights of Sam's 18-wheeler were the only source of light cutting through the thick darkness of Highway 47. The stretch of road was infamous among truckers for its desolation, a 50-mile span without a single gas station or diner. Sam didn't mind, though. He preferred solitude on the road. It gave him time to think, away from the chaos of truck stops and small talk with strangers. The clock on his dashboard glowed faintly, 12:03 a.m. Sam adjusted his cap and rubbed his tired eyes. Just a few more hours to his destination, and he could rest. Suddenly, a movement on the side of the road caught his attention. He squinted through the windshield and slowed down. Standing there, illuminated in his high beams, was a figure, a man wearing a thin jacket and jeans, shivering in the cold night air. He held out a thumb, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his hood. Sam wasn't one to pick up hitchhikers, especially at this hour. But something about the man's slouched posture and trembling hands tugged at his sense of decency. With a sigh, he pulled the truck to a stop a few feet ahead and leaned over to unlock the passenger door. "Need a ride?" Sam called out as the man approached. The hitchhiker nodded, his movements stiff and jerky, as if every step was a struggle. When he climbed into the cab, Sam noticed how pale and gaunt he looked. The man couldn't have been older than 30, but his sunken eyes and ashen skin gave him a ghostly appearance. "Thanks," the hitchhiker muttered, his voice hoarse. He closed the door and hugged himself tightly, shivering despite the warm air blasting from the truck's vents. "No problem. Where you headed?" Sam asked, glancing at him. The man hesitated. "Just down the road." "Anywhere's fine." Sam frowned but didn't press. He shifted the truck into gear and eased back onto the highway. For a while, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and the faint whistle of wind through the cracked window. After a few miles, Sam tried to make conversation. "Cold night to be out here. What brings you to this stretch of nowhere?" The hitchhiker didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window, his breath fogging the glass. Finally, he murmured, "This road, it's cursed, you know." Sam chuckled nervously. "Cursed? What makes you say that?" The man turned to face him, his eyes dark and hollow. "Have you ever heard about mile marker 34? Sam shook his head. "Can't say I have." The hitchhiker leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Bad things happen there. Accidents, disappearances, people say the road swallows them up. I've seen it." A chill ran down Sam's spine. He tried to laugh it off. "Sounds like one of those urban legends truckers like to swap at rest stops." "It's not a legend," the man said, his tone grave. "I was there. I saw her." Sam glanced at him. "Her?" The hitchhiker's hands trembled as he clutched his knees. "A woman in white. She stands by the marker, waiting for someone to stop. But if you do," he trailed off, staring into the distance as if reliving a memory too painful to recount. Sam cleared his throat. "You're telling me you saw a ghost?" The hitchhiker nodded slowly, and so did the others. They didn't make it out. A heavy silence fell between them. Sam couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine. He had heard his share of ghost stories during late-night drives, but something about the hitchhiker's demeanor, his trembling voice, his haunted eyes made this feel different. Real. "Look," Sam said, trying to lighten the mood, "I'm not one to believe in ghosts. But I'll make sure to steer clear of mile marker 34, just in case." The hitchhiker didn't respond. He simply stared straight ahead, his expression blank. As the miles rolled by, Sam's unease deepened. He couldn't stop glancing at the hitchhiker, who sat motionless, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Sam noticed something strange. The man's reflection in the windshield was faint, almost transparent. Sam's heart began to race. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "It's just your imagination," he told himself. "You're tired. You've been driving too long." But when he glanced at the passenger seat again, the hitchhiker was gone. Sam slammed on the brakes, his heart pounding. The truck screeched to a halt, tires skidding on the asphalt. He whipped his head around, searching the cab, but it was empty. The door was still locked, and the seatbelt hung limp, untouched. Cold sweat dripped down his back as he scanned the darkness outside. There was no sign of the hitchhiker, no footprints, no shadow. Nothing. Just as Sam was about to chalk it up to hallucination, his eyes fell on a weathered sign by the side of the road. It read, "Mile marker 34. His blood ran cold. He hadn't realized how far they had driven. A faint figure emerged from the darkness ahead, standing directly under the marker. Sam squinted, his breath catching in his throat. It was a woman, her white dress fluttering in the breeze, her long hair obscuring her face. She stood motionless, her head tilted as if she were listening for something. Sam's instinct screamed at him to drive, but his hands felt frozen on the wheel. The woman raised an arm and pointed directly at him. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. A distorted voice whispered through the static, "Turn back before it's too late." Sam didn't need to be told twice. He slammed the truck into reverse, his heart pounding as he sped away from the mile marker. The figure in white disappeared in his rearview mirror, but her image burned in his mind. When he reached the next town, Sam parked at a diner and stumbled inside, his legs trembling. He found a seat at the counter and ordered a coffee, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the cup. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, noticed his distress. "You okay, hon? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sam gave a hollow laugh. "Maybe I have." He recounted the night's events, leaving out no detail. The waitress's face paled as he spoke, and when he finished, she leaned in close. "You said mile marker 34, she whispered. Sam nodded. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "There's a story about that place. About 10 years ago, a woman was killed there hit by a truck while she was trying to hitch a ride. They say her spirit still wanders the highway, looking for someone to take her home." Sam's stomach churned. "And the hitchhiker I picked up, who was he?" The waitress hesitated. "I've heard about him too. Some folks say he was the truck driver who hit her. He died a few years later, but his ghost warns others to stay away, trying to atone for what he did." Sam felt the blood drain from his face. The hitchhiker's last words echoed in his mind, "Stay away from mile marker 34. From that day on, Sam avoided Highway 47 altogether. But no matter how far he drove, he could never forget the haunted look in the hitchhiker's eyes, or the woman in white, waiting for her next unsuspecting victim. Story 2. The Wilson family's road trip had been uneventful until they reached the isolated rest area off Highway 61. It was past 10 p.m. and the kids, Emma and Jake, had been complaining about needing a bathroom break for the last 10 miles. Reluctantly, Mark Wilson pulled their aging sub into the dimly lit parking lot of the rest area, which was shrouded by thick trees and an eerie stillness. "Quick stop," Mark muttered to his wife, Lisa, as he killed the engine. "We'll be back on the road in 10. Lisa gave a tight nod, clutching her sweater closer. The cold night air seeped into the car as they stepped out. The parking lot was deserted except for one other vehicle, an old rusty sedan with its front doors wide open. It was parked at an odd angle, as if someone had stopped in a hurry. "That's weird," Lisa said, eyeing the car. "Where's the driver?" "Probably inside," Mark replied, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. Something about the open doors unsettled him. The rest area consisted of a single building with a flickering neon light above the entrance. The cracked asphalt and overgrown grass made it clear that maintenance wasn't a priority here. As the family approached, Emma tugged on Lisa's sleeve. "Mom, do you hear that?" Lisa paused, tilting her head. At first it sounded like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but then it became clear, muffled cries, faint and desperate, coming from the woods behind the rest area. "Is someone out there?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Mark frowned. "Stay here with the kids. I'll check it out." "Mark, no," Lisa hissed, gripping his arm. "We don't know what's out there." But Mark was already walking toward the tree-line, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The cries grew louder, more frantic, as he approached. Lisa pulled Emma and Jake closer, her eyes darting between the sedan and the woods. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Dad, come back," Jake called out, his voice echoing in the still night. Mark ignored him, pushing deeper into the shadows. The beam of his flashlight landed on something in the brush, a red scarf, torn and tangled in the branches. Nearby, the cries stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. "Hello?" Mark called, his voice shaky. A twig snapped behind him. He spun around, the flashlight illuminating a figure standing several feet away. It was tall and gaunt, its face obscured by the shadows of the trees. Mark's heart raced as more figures emerged, their pale faces and hollow eyes fixed on him. "Lisa, get in the car," he shouted, backing away. Lisa's blood ran cold, as she saw the figures stepping out of the woods. Their movements were unnatural, jerky, like marionettes on strings. She grabbed the kids and ran toward the SUV, fumbling with the keys in her panic. "Mom, hurry!" Emma cried. Mark sprinted back to the car, his flashlight bouncing wildly. He could feel the figures closing in, their guttural whispers filling the air. Lisa yanked the door open and shoved the kids inside as Mark reached the driver's side. "Start the car," Lisa screamed, her voice breaking. Mark turned the key, but the engine sputtered and died. He tried again, his hands trembling, but the car refused to start. The figures were now at the edge of the parking lot, their empty eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "Mark," Lisa screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I'm trying," Mark shouted, slamming his fist on the dashboard. He turned the key one more time, and the engine roared to life. Relief washed over him as he threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as they sped out of the lot. But the nightmare wasn't over. As they hurtled down the highway, Lisa glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The figures were running after them, their pale forms moving impossibly fast, their twisted faces illuminated by the taillights. "They're following us," she gasped. Mark pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the speedometer climbing as the SUV barreled down the dark road. The figures didn't relent, their shrieks piercing the night. Suddenly, one of them leapt onto the back of the car, its bony hands clawing at the rear window. "Dad, it's on the car," Jake yelled, cowering in his seat. Mark swerved violently, the figure losing its grip and tumbling onto the asphalt. The others stopped, their glowing eyes fading into the distance as the family sped away. It wasn't until they reached a well-lit gas station miles down the road that they finally stopped, their hearts still racing. Mark got out to inspect the car, his legs shaking. On the rear window, scratched into the glass, were 3 words, "We are watching." The family never spoke of the incident again, but the memory haunted them. Every time Mark drove past a rest area at night, he felt their eyes on him, waiting for the next traveler to make the same mistake. Story 3. The fog rolled in thicker than Elise had expected as she maneuvered her sedan up the winding curves of the mountain highway. She had driven through fog before, but nothing like this. The dense whiteness swallowed everything outside the range of her headlights, leaving her with the unnerving sensation of floating in a void. The clock on her dashboard glowed faintly, 1:13 a.m. "Just keep your eyes on the road," Elise muttered to herself. She had promised her parents she'd visit them after months of being too busy with work. A late-night drive through the Blue Ridge Mountains seemed like a good idea earlier in the day. Now, she wasn't so sure. She turned up the radio to break the silence, but all she got was static. Irritated, she clicked it off, leaving the muffled hum of her tires on the damp asphalt as the only sound. The first sign of trouble came as she rounded a particularly sharp curve. A pair of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, distant but piercing through the fog. Elise's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen another car in over an hour, and their sudden appearance felt jarring. Probably just another night driver, she reassured herself. But as the minutes passed, she realized the car was maintaining the same distance. Whether she sped up or slowed down, the headlights stayed unwaveringly behind her, neither gaining nor falling back. Elise's grip tightened on the wheel. Her pulse quickened. "Why aren't they passing me?" she wondered. The logical side of her brain suggested it might be another driver being cautious in the fog, but a darker thought crept in. What if they're following me? She tested her theory, pressing harder on the accelerator as she reached a stretch of straight road. The headlights behind her did the same, keeping pace. Her heart began to race as she tried to lose them by taking the next right turn a narrow, unmarked road she hadn't planned on. But the car followed. "Okay, this is not normal," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. Her fingers trembled on the steering wheel as she made another sharp turn, this time onto a gravel road that wound steeply uphill. The car behind her followed again, its headlights slicing through the fog like twin blades. Elise's mind raced. She didn't know these roads well and feared getting lost or worse, trapped. She pulled her phone from the passenger seat, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal. She cursed under her breath and stuffed it back into her bag. The headlights behind her flickered for a moment, then reappeared, closer than before. Elise's breath came in shallow gasps. She was speeding now, her tires skidding slightly on the damp gravel. The sharp incline ended abruptly, and she found herself back on the main highway. In the distance, she spotted a faint glow, a neon sign cutting through the fog. Relief washed over her as she recognized the silhouette of a diner perched precariously on the edge of the mountain. She veered into the parking lot, gravel crunching under her tires, and came to a shaky stop in front of the building. The other car pulled in behind her. Elise sat frozen, her hands still gripping the wheel, as the vehicle rolled to a stop several yards away. It was an old, beat-up sedan, its paint chipped and dull under the dim light of the diner's sign. The engine cut off, but no one got out. Elise's throat tightened as she stared at the car in her rearview mirror. The fog swirled around it, giving it an almost spectral quality. She couldn't make out the driver's face, or even if there was one. Gathering her courage, Elise grabbed her keys and bolted out of her car, slamming the door behind her. She rushed into the diner, the bell above the door jingling sharply. The warmth and soft hum of fluorescent lights were a stark contrast to the chilling air outside. A man stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. He looked up as she entered, his weathered face breaking into a faint smile. "Rough night to be out driving, isn't it?" Elise nodded, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Through the diner's large front windows, she could see the other car still parked in the lot, its silhouette barely visible in the fog. The figure inside hadn't moved. Yeah, she said, her voice trembling. "Listen, there's a car that's been following me. It pulled in behind me just now. Can I use your phone?" The man frowned, setting the rag aside. "Sure thing. It's over there on the wall." Elise hurried to the phone and picked up the receiver. To her dismay, the line crackled with static no-dial tone. She hung it up and tried again, but it was dead. "Your phone's not working," she said, panic creeping into her voice. The man sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Storm last week knocked out the lines. I haven't gotten anyone up here to fix it yet." Elise swallowed hard, her gaze darting back to the window. The car was still there, as still and silent as a predator waiting for its prey. The man followed her gaze and frowned. "That the car you're talking about?" She nodded. "They've been following me for miles. I tried to lose them, but they just won't stop." The man's expression darkened. "You sure you didn't stop on the road? Not even for a second?" Elise shook her head. "No, why?" He hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "You're not the first to tell me a story like this." "What do you mean?" Elise asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned against the counter, his voice low and grave. "Folks around here talk about a phantom car that haunts this stretch of the highway. Always appears on foggy nights, following travelers who make the mistake of stopping. They say it's a ghost from an old accident, a driver who ran someone off the road, then disappeared into the fog. Now, it's like he's searching for something or someone." Elise's stomach churned. "You're saying that thing out there isn't real?" The man shrugged. "Real enough to scare the hell out of people. Some say if you stop too long, it'll take you. Don't ask me what that means. I've never seen anyone come back to tell the tale." Elise stared at him, her pulse hammering in her ears. The story sounded absurd, but the dread in her chest was all too real. She glanced back out the window and froze. The car was gone. "Where did it go?" she whispered, backing away from the window. The man came around the counter, peering outside. "That's not a good sign." "What do you mean?" Elise asked, her voice cracking. "Means it's not done with you yet," he said grimly. "If I were you, I'd get back in that car and keep driving. Don't stop for anything, not until you're off this mountain." Elise's instincts screamed at her to stay, but something in the man's eyes told her he wasn't lying. She nodded, her hands trembling, and bolted for the door. The fog had thickened, and the night felt colder than before. She climbed into her car and started the engine. The headlights cut through the fog, revealing the empty parking lot. For a brief moment she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the phantom car had lost interest. Maybe she could make it off the mountain unscathed. But as she pulled out of the lot and back onto the highway, the headlights appeared in her rearview mirror once more. Her chest tightened, and she pressed the accelerator, her speed climbing as the winding road stretched endlessly before her. The other car followed, its headlights unwavering, its presence oppressive. Elise drove faster, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. But no matter how fast she went, the phantom car stayed behind her. The fog seemed to thicken around it, the air crackling with an otherworldly energy. Suddenly, her radio crackled to life, the static twisting into a distorted voice. "You can't run." Elise screamed, her foot slamming down on the gas pedal. The road blurred around her, the headlights behind her growing brighter, closer. She felt the car shudder as the fog closed in, pressing against her like a living thing. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the phantom car vanished. Elise slammed on the brakes, her car skidding to a halt on the empty road. Her chest heaved as she looked around, but there was no sign of the other vehicle. The fog began to lift, revealing the faint glow of dawn on the horizon. She sat there for a long moment, her hands trembling on the wheel, before finally driving away. When she reached her parents' house hours later, she told them everything. Her father listened quietly, his face pale. "That road's cursed," he said finally. "You're lucky you got away." Elise never drove that highway again. But on foggy nights, she could still feel the Phantom's headlights in her rearview mirror, watching, waiting. And she knew one thing for certain: some roads are better left untraveled.